welcome back to Girl at the Con. I just wanted to thank you all for the 100+ subs. It means so much to me that you are enjoying my content. Sadly, I fell down not too long ago and busted my chin, so I'm not really camera ready. So I'm going through some of my backlog of older things in interviews such as this. This was shot, I want to say 2-3 years ago at Fangaea, so it is a little out of date, but I think that you will really get a kick out of Gidon and what he does.
So just tell me who you guys are and what you guys do. Right, as it's your baby, you start.
Yeah, but you guys look better today. We are Galactic Journey, which you can go to at galacticjourney.org. We are time travelers. Right now for us it is April 29th, 1968. Yesterday was April 28th. Tomorrow is April 30th. A couple of days ago we watched Star Trek, the summer rerun of Amok Time, with original commercials and fanzine readings with letters from DC Fontana and Jimmy Doohan. And we live in the past because we are not sane. But it's really fun, and you can too.
All right. Well, tell us how to find you guys.
If you go to galacticjourney.org.
Well, so galacticjourney.org is the main project, and that was the beginning. Every 2 days on that site, you will find a new article written as though from the perspective of somebody who lives in the past. It is by a modern person, perhaps one of us or one of our very large team worldwide contributors, diverse team of worldwide contributors, and it explores. We review the science fiction magazines of the time. We review the movies that were coming out. We are about to have a review of 2001 Fangaea. We had just reviewed Planet with the Apes recently. We reviewed the television shows at the time. We have the fashion columnist. He talks about the fashion of a quarterly article. We talk about the comic books, politics, and the space shops of the time. There's just tons of really interesting stuff. So please come check us out. If you're not interested in one thing, you can search for the things that you are interested in, because we've got something for everybody there.
So what made you start this?
So you started it.
It's Janice's fault. Well, I started the project offline in 1954, and I was just reading the monthly magazines. And then in 58, Janice said, "Why don't you recommend some of your favorite stories?" And I said, "Oh, I'll do a blog, and I'll get like 2 or 3 people to watch the thing." And then it exploded. And so 10 years later, it's 1968, and we have a radio station, and we have a news broadcast every week. And what else?
Broadcasts are fun.
We broadcast Star Trek.
Yeah.
We do everything. It's a huge project.
And we have a Discord.
Arma Cancelad Atanagra. I don't know what that means yet. Not for another 20 years.
So we're watching the original Star Trek right now, 1968, 1 week at a time.
That's cool. It's like that. It's very transformative.
I think Patrick Stewart has hair at this time.
Yes.
Yeah, Steve Martin is just becoming a thing in the late 60s. Like we've seen a very young George Carlin, Goldie Hawn.
It's really interesting seeing actors who will later become very popular, or people who will later become important. And nobody knows in that time that they're important yet. So it's tricky because you don't know, you don't want to necessarily too much attention on something that wouldn't have gotten a lot of attention at the time. But you also want to be like, look, it's this person.
And on the other hand, you also have to be not too fulsome in your praise of, say, Bill Cosby, who was very big in 1960.
Yes, very big.
Covering your face. But yeah, that's actually, I call it one of the tragedies, because it was one of the very first shows that's had a black man on an equal footing with a white man.
The show I Spy.
Which was a great show.
Yeah, fantastic show. It was extremely progressive. It was all shot on location around the world. So if you want to see what 1968 looks like in, or what Japan or Hong Kong or Mexico looks like in 1968. You can see it through that show. Italy.
Beautiful downtown Burbank.
Or yeah. But then you have to accept the fact that one of the actors in it is Boo.
It was terrible.
Person, horrible person. So how do you deal with that? How do you say, yes, this was a show that was incredibly progressive at the time. It was made by the same studio that made Star Trek, Desilu.
What you do is you say, I Spy is an amazing show, and how about that Robert Culp?
Robert Culp and Bill Cosby were the leads, and they were a team, worked together, of spies. They were partners. So, yeah, you have to say, well, hell yeah, the Robert Culp did a great job, and yeah, there's this other guy too.
The coolest thing about the journey is you get everything in its perspective, right? So if you're a Star Trek fan in 2023, you know about Star Trek, and you might know some of the lore, right? You might know about the letter writing campaign or whatever, but it's always in context of modern Star Trek or the Star Trek that came along the way. For us, the only context is the other TV shows like Mission Impossible, right? Like there's a point where Stephen Hill, who was the lead in the first season of Mission Impossible, is going around the studio trying to get 10 Jews together so they can do a Minion. And so he's like tapping Bill Shatner on the shoulder and saying, hey, come upstairs so we can do the Minion, right? Luckily, there's enough Jews between Star Trek and Mission Impossible. This is back in the old days before they had the rules against Jews playing Romulans and Vulcans. Actually, you could only play Romulan and Vulcan if you were Jewish. I'm not bitter about that.
Yeah, he's joking a little bit, but it is really interesting. We just watched the rerun of Uptime, and it's true that the Vulcans have a very distinctive look, and part of the reason why is because all of the actors who were playing that were Jewish, generally Ashkenazi.
The person who played T'Pring, T'Pau, Sarek, next season, the person who will play the Romulan commander.
And of course, Leonard D. In a couple of decades, you guys are going to be blown away by this fan called T'Pau that is named after the. That's exciting.
As they say in Japan.
Yeah. That's something to look forward to. We have a lot of stuff to look forward to.
We have a lot of stuff to look forward to, but the thing about the project that's cool is we don't look forward. We find the stuff that's cool right now because there's so much. Like Elijah over there is now a huge fan of Laugh-It. Like he insists we watch Laugh-In every single week when it comes out. Laugh-In is a show nobody in 2023 knows about.
Laugh-In is kind of one of the very first news comedy shows, I would say.
And as Lorelai says, half the humor is Gen Z humor, just like random weird stuff. It's no sense.
But yes, and these are some of the early memes of that generation.
We called them catchphrases back then. Yeah. Buttons. Everybody wears buttons.
Everybody wears buttons.
This is the equivalent of a meme in the 60s is buttons.
We made those ourselves.
They're actually exact duplicates of buttons that existed back. Very proud of these.
But also, yeah. One of the things that's interesting about 55 years as a gap, people like to ask us, why 55 years? Why not 50 years? Why not 60 years? And we have a lot of glib responses to that, like 60 years is too long and 50 years wasn't long enough. But one of the interesting things that we find is 55 years actually really does have an interesting resonance with the past. And one thing that is true right now is there's a very strong disaffection among young people because Vietnam is killing, so many young people, and there's so many people who feel disillusioned and afraid because of nuclear war and all of these things, and have grown up with the fear of nuclear war. And so this is just the beginning of hippies and the beginning of student protests and there's just huge racial tensions. Oh my gosh. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr. was just shot. He was just assassinated, which was a very big deal, of course, on Guard. And they covered it.
Brilliant coverage by several different people. Yeah, getting different voices and thoughts on it.
So there is that sense of disaffection, and I see the same thing today with a lot of young people, Lorelai and Lorelai's friends, feeling this same kind of distrust of the government, frustration with the way things are, desire for things to be better, and anger that things at the way things are, and desire to change things. And so there's an echo there. There's a resonance between these two times, and we see that again and again. the interesting things about doing the project?
I think there's so much value in living in the because when you see, especially the 60s in particular, in your history class, and it's the listed important dates. There's the Berlin Wall coming down. There's
Going up, it's the 60s.
and then coming down up later, Stonewall riots, and mostly I'm probably around 70s events too, but it's the 60s were the start of this era of change that swept through into the 70s, and these were large historical moments, civil rights movements, things like that. And these are things that you sort of learn about with a degree of separation in classroom, sort of making these movements almost seem like fossilized. And something about living through it and looking at the feed on the right side of the Journey website where it just says news events happening all the time, every day. Watching the news broadcasts, watching the television, watching Star Trek, whenever you can see the change. It shows that there are people behind these movements, and there are people that those movements are created for. And there's movements that still need to be resolved today, that we're still fighting. But it also shows the incredible icons and progress from before that started this momentum. And I think it's important to remember that these events in history are the culmination of the work of people before them. And recognizing that is more important than necessarily the date event that I have. I'll say.
So right now in 1968, which is where we currently live, a computer is either a person or, more likely these days, a machine the size of this room. We're going to give you a quick setup of what's going on right now, April 29th, 1968. And then you ask us questions. The best questions are going to get buttons. So you direct where this panel goes, because we can talk about anything. From comic books, Black Panther just debuted a couple of days ago. In fact, a couple of years ago. In fact, in 2023, have you guys heard of Star Trek?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you guys heard of Doctor Who?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Have you guys heard of the Avengers?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you guys heard of Batman?
Yes.
Fandom hasn't changed in 55 years. That's why we do this. Although you, sir, you look like Spider-Man, but I know you're not. But welcome, because the seeds for you were laid back then. So what's going on April 29th, 1968? If you go here, you'll notice this thing. What I want you to do tomorrow is go here, because tomorrow at 5 p.m., KGJ Weekly News comes out, and yours truly, dressed like this, will give you the news in 5 minutes and tell you everything that's going on. But so you know, for instance, earlier this month, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And that was a huge deal, and we covered it. At the end of last month, Lyndon Johnson said he wasn't going to run for president. He's going to focus on ending the war in Vietnam. And so it looks like now we're going to have Richard Nixon fighting Hubert Humphrey in the least exciting presidential election in the history of humanity.
Go Humphrey.
Yes, I'm going to be making buttons for those too. As far as science fiction is concerned, Batman just ended, thank God.
The TV show.
The TV show.
Green Hornet TV show just ended, and that's a sad thing, because that's a fantastic show. If you have not seen Green Hornet, find a place to watch reruns of Green Hornet, because it is Batman done well. And I can say that because actually the same people made the two shows. But Green Hornet is more serious in its own way. And it has Bruce Lee!
Yeah.
It's the Bruce Lee show!
See, the thing about Green Hornet, Batman is a show made for children. You may love it, you may not love it, but it is inarguably a show that was made for children. Green Hornet is still a comic book show. It still has some comic book ridiculousness, but it is a show made for grown-ups. And it's a great show. It's a lot of fun. So.
Science fiction is not all on the screen, although 2001 just came out, and a movie called Planet of the Apes. We've reviewed both of those.
They haven't come to San Diego yet, so we haven't watched them, but we will pretty soon.
But all of these shows and movies have a steeping in the written literature. All of them come from, used to be, science fiction came out in magazines. It still does in the 60s, and it even still does in your era. In fact, some of us even been published in some of those magazines, but no big deal.
but also books. Right now, 60s is the age of the paperback. How many of you are familiar with the science fiction literary scene of the 60s? A few people, right? This is the era of Moon is a Harsh Mistress, Stranger in a Strange Land. Chip Delaney, first black science fiction author, has taken the world by storm, coming out with progressive masterpiece after progressive masterpiece. Last year, 2 years ago, he came out with a book called Babel 17, which reads like it was written today. It's so out there, which makes it of our time in 2023. Women. How many are familiar with women science fiction authors of the 60s?
Ursula K. Le Guin.
That's usually the one people can know of.
Okay.
Yep.
Octavia Butler.
Not come out yet.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, who's that?
The two of our time that people might who might know their names are Anne McCaffrey and Ursula K. Le Guin, but they didn't come out in a vacuum. There was a lot of women that were being published before then. Not as many as there were men, but there's a lot of women whose names that are not remembered.
And one of the things we do at Galactic Journey is we not only focus on old stuff, we focus on the cool old stuff by people who may have gotten forgotten by history because they were the wrong gender, or the wrong sexuality, or the wrong color. And we have found lots of really cool people as a result. That is the cool thing about the time travel, is you live back then, and so you don't know what's coming. You don't know what cool thing is 5 years from now. You only know what cool stuff is now. And in 68, there's tons of cool stuff. And that is what I'm here to tell you about.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
As the youngest person in this family that is living in the
55 years ago.
thank you. Is there ever a time where you're just like, I am so over this 2023, please?
Oh man, that's an interesting question. I remember a few years ago getting interviewed by a person who was looking into like weird family stories and weird family situations, and so they came and interviewed us because we're about as weird as it gets, I guess.
Speak up.
And so I remember she asked like, so do you tell your friends about this? Do they ever find it weird that you like live in the past? And I'm like, well, not really. I mean, it's just sort of part of my life. It's I turn on the TV and there's 60s television. I turn on the radio and there's 60s radio. And I also consume new media. I use my EVAC to watch a show that's logo is a red rectangle with a little triangle in it.
YouTubers.
Yeah, and more decentralized media like that. But so I sort of see it as another form of media for me to consume. I sort of have a foot in both worlds. I do find that sometimes when the news is very grim, when there's a lot of heavy losses in the Vietnam War, or LBJ decides not to run again for presidency, when MLK was assassinated, it's really hard to go and put yourself back in that moment. And sometimes it's nice to just sort of take a step back and be like, I'm really glad that our country is not actively at war right now. It has given me an appreciation for some of the things that are not as horrible today as they were back then. And so I would say that's really the only time is when things get so heavy that it's hard to take. And I like to come back and be like, I'm glad that like things may be more stable in certain regards today. But I've never found that I want to escape the media, because I love the media.
On the other hand, during the pandemic, it was when we were being extremely isolated, and it was mostly just the three of us. Sometimes it was nice to be able to go back and live in, at that time, 1965,
1965 was better than 2020.
Yes, it was. And so there's an escapism the other direction, too. Mm-hmm. It's a lot simpler in some ways.
It's really nice to be able to slow down 2023 is a very fast-paced, very 10-second snippet sort of thing, and 68 is slower, it's chaotic. How many of you think 2023 sucks? How many of you think that life is just terrible where you are?
It's hard, but not as bad as it was.
So that's what we've learned by living in the past. By any metric you want to measure, things suck more in the past.
Yeah, the
Than they
comment
do.
was, it's hard, but not as bad as it was.
Sure.
But there's still a lot of frustration with things as they are now, and
Right.
justifiable frustration.
Right, we're not done yet. But
Yeah.
it's nice to know that we're making progress. But I can talk about it if you want. And you all should join us because we broadcast it and you will never get an experience like this again. Melissa, tell them why, because you got turned on at WhoCon and you've been watching ever since. Tell them why it is the coolest thing in the world.
So as I was telling Gideon earlier today, for me, it has been very transformative in how I interact with Star Trek TOS. So for me, as a sci-fi fan, all my friends are Trekkies, and I was like, okay, I'm going to watch Star Trek. And I sat down and I attempted to binge it, and I got about a quarter of the way through the first season and said, F this noise. I cannot do this. This is... How do people like this show? It's awful. It's garbage. And then I started watching it. Yes, I said it was garbage. Throw stones at me later. And I started watching on Gideon's feed it wasn't Thursday when I started.
It was Wednesday.
It was Wednesday, yeah. And
That's because Star Trek used to be on a Thursday, and then it got moved to Friday in the second season.
yeah,
Since we're matching up dates, not weekdays.
days, yeah. So I started watching it, and I was like, oh, it's so much easier to digest when you're watching it once a week. And then because it was intended to have a commercial break, things in the episode itself sit differently because there is that, cutaway to commercials and little mini cliffhangers and stuff like that. So it changed how I viewed it, and I love it now. And I'm very upset when I can't watch it, or I stupidly forget to watch it because I get distracted by the 23rd century that we're in. But it will change how you interact with that media.
Not only that, but if you are thinking of Star Trek as something old and camp and stupid and dated, to give you an idea just how progressive it is, the commercials give you the context, right? Because you'll be watching Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and Lieutenant Uhura doing cool things in this self-contained future universe that is post-racism, to some degree post-sexism, not all the way, because in the 60s black people had become people, but women had not yet. That's something that won't come until the late 60s and the 70s, sadly. And the gay people won't become people till the 80s. But you watch the commercials and all of a sudden you're slammed into the 60s. You be a good little Maxwell housewife.
Yes.
And then you realize, oh, no, Star Trek is something special, something that has never happened before. And that's what's great about science fiction in general, is that's where you'll see the future. So I'm going to take a little detour into fiction. I don't have it here today. I should have brought I Want the Stars.
I told you.
I know. I run a publishing company. And the reason I run a publishing company is we kept finding all these great stories, and I'm like, these stories need to exist. So for instance, these two books are nothing but science fiction stories by women from the mid-20th century. These are the best science fiction stories by women we have found, which means they're some of the best science fiction stories, period. And one of the books that we came out with was that one at the bottom there, I Want the Stars by Tom Purdon. And that was the very first book to star, and explicitly, a person of color.
The very first science fiction story
Science
that we
fiction
know
book.
of
Right.
that stars man of color.
And also the first one to have a queer couple and portrayed positively.
Yeah, they're not a big part of the story, but they're not, and I don't want to give the impression that it's all
not
rainbows,
right.
but they are not portrayed as having mental illness. It's very matter of fact.
Every once in a while we get asked that, are you biased because of your modern perspective? Which I always find really funny, because I have about as not a modern perspective as you can possibly have, having lived through all the stuff that came before this stuff. So my problem with Batman, how old were you when you watched Batman? You must have been very young.
Yeah, I was 2 or 3 years old. I was born 65.
So
whenever it got to Britain, I was able to watch it.
Batman is it's a show for kids. Although, I will tell you, 1966 was the year of Batman in the United States. It was everywhere. Go-go clubs, media, costumes, you name it, everything was Batman. And what's amazing about Batman is how quickly the bubble popped. Like, it had a season and already people were done with it.
It was a fad.
Which, poor Adam West, right? So the reason I did not enjoy Lorelai was young too when we watched it, but she was in her teens by that point. My problem with Batman was I just found it actually kind of dull. I liked Burgess Meredith. Actually, I'll tell you the exact thing that's wrong with Batman for me. Because I thought Alfred was fine, I thought Robin was great, I thought some of the villains were great. The real problem with Batman is Adam West. I feel like the man has no charisma whatsoever. And I think it would have been better served by someone who knew it was kind of a camp role, like Gene Barry, who played Amos Burke in Burke's Law, right? With a little bit of a wink. How many of you are familiar with the James Bond franchise? All right. Right now in 1968, James Bond is, of course, Sean Connery. Although, it's about to be someone else for the very first time this year in a movie that a lot of people will say is one of the better ones. And then he's going to come back, right? And then it's going to be a fellow named Roger Moore. Roger Moore right now is famous in England for doing a show called The Saint. And The Saint is currently on my rerun station. And it's also on my current station. It's a pretty good show, although not as good as Danger Man, which is a show nobody knows about. Which,
Patrick McGowan?
Yes, Patrick McGowan.
well, of course you would know. Yeah, we actually, the way we show Star Trek every week, we actually had our British contingent showing The Prisoner every week as it came out, with original commercials and Captain Scarlet and...
before and another show after.
And finally the 1948 show. This is very British. So my...
Batman.
Right, so, sorry, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. So Roger Moore, you may or may not like Roger Moore as James Bond. I personally, in my future persona, really enjoyed Roger Moore because I felt like James Bond is a ridiculous character. And Roger Moore knew that, and Sean Connery didn't. And so I actually prefer Roger Moore as James Bond because he plays it with a wink. And I feel like Adam West was incapable of playing Batman with a wink, and he really needed to.
I think also, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, he was asking if living in the past has affected our future perspective at all too. Because like we talked about, does our future bias our past perspective? But do you think living in the past has affected how you perceive your life in 2023?
Oh, you mean like a nostalgia filter?
Yeah.
So we don't have a nostalgia filter, right? Because this is all new for us.
It definitely affects how we see modern Star Treks.
Yeah.
We judge many modern Star Treks very harshly because we've watched the original and we see where they get things right and we see where they don't get
I
things
watched the
right.
first episode of Picard. I'm like, stop shaking the camera! He's right there. I can see him. You can stop.
I wonder the cameraman might be the same age as Picard and just have shaking hands.
Sorry, I'm being terribly ageist and just...
On the subject of nostalgia too, it's interesting because we, in the 60s, went and saw local reruns at local drive-ins and stuff of old 50s movies. And we reviewed some absolute classics like Forbidden Planet, When Worlds Collide, things like that. And we've reviewed them all on the journey if you want to see our reactions. But to give a little hint of how we reacted, it was less than favorable for a lot of them, and a lot of them that were beloved classics for a lot of other people. And so it's really interesting kind of going at it from the time, because we can sort of look at it like at face value at what it is as oh, this movie feels kind of like kind of dated, like it is old for its time, Whereas
Right.
someone looking back will say, "Oh wow, it's this beautiful, idyllic 50s movie." And I think looking at it from the time, you can be more critical.
Yeah,
on it.
Gideon talked about, he watched Valley of the Dolls recently.
Oh.
And he talked about how it felt,
Have any of you seen Valley of the Dolls?
he said it felt old fashioned. Speaking from a 60s perspective, he said it felt static and conservative.
Yeah. It's a movie that came out in '67 starring Patty Duke. And it feels old, which makes sense. It was based on a book that came out in the late 40s. And you can just tell. That's the thing. From your perspective in 2023, everything just kind of looks old, and it's sort of a blob of old. But things are changing extremely fast. In the 60s, musical genres come and go every 2 years. So I've witnessed the rise and fall of rockabilly and original rock and roll. Surf guitar came and went. The British invasion came and swept it away. And Mercy Beat came and went. Garage rock came and went. And now we're in the middle of psychedelia and folk rock.
Yeah.
And those are starting to die and be swept away by other stuff. And every other media is the same way. We went from all black and white prime time to all color prime time.
In like 2 years.
And all of us, and the world is just different. We went in fiction from the 50s to the new wave.
And now, not only that, not just the new wave, but now science fiction magazines in England are getting banned
For having the F word in them.
Yeah,
Fuck
and
no.
too much sex and
Yes.
I hope you enjoyed that. Gideon is one of my favorite people, and Galactic Journeys is just completely awesome. So please go check them out. Thank you again for getting me up to 100 subs. I really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next one.